one thing that we've got to factor into this conversation too is that the last 2+ years of operating in a pandemic with quarantines has really changed the dynamic as far as remote work. And there's a lot of places where their strong preference is to be together in a building or in a physical location, but they're unable to do that now. And so I think we should probably unpack a little bit, what's it going to be like for somebody who is searching for a remote job and doesn't want to relocate to a different geographic area and uses this heat map in order to find a job that says, remote, that this is a remote position. And let's say, they're living in Colorado and they snag one of these remote positions in Washington, D.C. Now, talk a little bit about, is that a good idea? What are the risks? Or, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so that's a great thing to talk about, right? So I think, we can talk a little bit more about remote versus not remote as well in general. And there are some places where you're going to have to go into the building. A lot of cybersecurity jobs, especially if you're doing cleared jobs, you're going to have to go in the building because you don't have top secret information in your home office or secret information in your home office. So those jobs, you have to be in the building. You're not going to be able to work remote. But for a lot of companies, remote is an option, right? If you got hired by Kip's company, for instance, he's a fully remote company. There's nothing wrong with that. I think some of the things you really need to think about when you're thinking about your career and long-term growth with a company, especially when you're going with a remote company, is are they remote only? Are they remote preferred? Or are they remote eligible, I guess is the best way to put it. And so let me break down those three categories, right? Remote only is what Kip says he is, right? Everybody on his team is remote. Nobody's coming into the office. And so that is the best environment if you want to be a remote person, have the best job opportunity for growth and promotion, because everyone is on the same level playing field. Everyone's remote, and so everyone has the same opportunity to get the same FaceTime with the CEO and the decision makers, whether that's through Zoom or Skype or whatever it happens to be, but you're all in the same level playing field. So that's remote only. The second is more what my company is. We are a remote first company. Now what that means is that most of my employees are remote, but there are a couple of employees who work together on a daily basis, or at least are within a 20-30 minute drive. For instance, I'm located down in Puerto Rico, and 4 of my team members, I can drive to their house within about an hour, and we can go meet up for coffee or lunch, and we can have meetings that way if we wanted to, even though we're not in the building. Now, the challenge with that is you have to figure out what that company culture is. Do they actually value all remote employees equally? Just because somebody is working in Colorado, if everybody else is in the office in Washington, then guess what? You're going to be out of some of those meetings, because a lot of those sidebar meetings that happen after the Zoom call is over, that's where a lot of the money is made per se, in terms of social capital and making inroads for the next promotion. So that is a risk you're taking when you're going to a remote position where the company is kind of half and half. Right now, a lot of companies are in that situation where people are working from home because they kind of have to, but they'd really like them to come back to the office. And so if you took this job right now over the next 2 years, you might get promoted wonderfully because everybody's at home anyway. But in 2 years, when everybody goes back to the office, you say, no, I'm going to stay home. Somebody else might be getting that promotion, you might not. And then the third category is those companies who are kind of remote by exception or remote eligible. I think about the government. I think about the military. I think about hospital chains and universities. They are designed as an in-person institution. And they may allow you to work from home 1 day a week, 2 days a week, maybe even a month or two at a time. But it's going to hurt you when it comes time for promotion, because they're so used to seeing Joe in every meeting or Mary in every meeting that they're not thinking about somebody else who's at home. Because you're getting your work product in on time, you're doing all your work, you're staying on budget, you're staying on task. You might be more productive than you've ever been before. And yet you're not going to get that social capital because people don't see you. They're not sharing a coffee with you on break. They're not going out to lunch with you. Those things do matter. And I know it's a bunch of political games, but honestly, I've seen it in my career too many times where the person who is the best worker is not the person who's getting promoted. It's the person who can communicate, the person with social skills, the person people like, they know, they trust, and whether or not that person really knows what they're doing or not, they are there, and there sometimes matters.
Yeah, a lot of the dynamics in play here that you just reviewed, Jason, are long-standing dynamics, all right? In other words, the fact that we've got a pandemic that's going on right now that has forced a lot of workforces into a remote situation, it's really sort of caused typical patterns of human behavior to become more pronounced and more pervasive and you know and all over the workforce. Whereas in the past, most companies, I think it's fair to say, were you know, they either didn't have remote work, or remote was like, yeah, maybe one day a week or something like that, right? As more of a like a flex kind of a thing, right? Almost a benefit. But I just want to say that these factors that you've mentioned have always been there. My first work from home opportunity was over 20 years ago, and I became very sensitized to this stuff very quickly. You know, the whole idea about being seen, having a face that goes with my name, and so I lived in Seattle. My company was in San Francisco. I would fly to San Francisco once a month, and I'd spend 5 days in the office, and that was predominantly my FaceTime. I didn't have an iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean
You know,
that was a way for you to be seen, and so people didn't forget about Kip.
that's
You
right.
know, and I'll tell you, I have had the same issue in my career, even in the military, which is a predominantly in-person business. Right?
Hmm.
When I was in the military, I was working as a cybersecurity planner at one of my positions, and I was being flown all over the world to go to conferences, do planning, do incident responses, all that kind of stuff. I'm doing great work, more work than anybody else. I'm putting in 80, 100-hour weeks to get things done. And when it came time for them to figure out who's the number one person, who's the number two person, as we're going down the 40 people in row, I ended up being, pretty high up, but I wasn't number one. And the answer I got was, well, you're never here. And I'm like, they're like, you're always in Hawaii. And I'm like, well, it's not like I'm on Hawaii on vacation, man. You're flying me out there on Sunday. I'm flying home on Saturday. And then you're turning me around the next day to go out again. My family's never seen me because I'm working hard for you. I'm doing all these great things. You love what I'm doing. Yeah, but you weren't here for all the meetings. That's the kind of thing that sometimes you have to realize. And had I realized that up front, I probably wouldn't have killed myself to the amount I did. Trying to do everything that I was doing for them. But that's one of those things you just have to think about and you have to realize. And it does happen in a lot of organizations because you're just not there. And when
And
you're
it's
out of
not
sight, sometimes you're out of mind.
And it's not fair. I mean, I'll just tell you that right now. It's
Yeah.
not fair in the sense that, Jason and other people in his situation aren't being rewarded for the actual work that they're doing. That is to say, the outcomes that they're producing. So that's another thing you should be thinking about when you join a company that has a remote culture. You got to find out, like, are employees measured based on what they produce, what they actually deliver? Or is it just a matter of, hey, I need a butt in a seat and I better see your butt in the seat, otherwise it doesn't count? That's a huge culture difference. And so if you don't know that going in, you need to figure it out fast.
Yeah, and one other thing that I think is really important for you to realize is if you are new to this industry and you're trying to get your first job, I would recommend you take a job in person for your first job. I would not take a remote job. And the reason for that is it is really hard to get spun up, to learn, to figure out what you're doing and how you're doing it when you're sitting at home by yourself or trying to meet with somebody over Zoom. There is something about being able to just sit next to somebody. And I will tell you this to you as somebody who has run his company as a remote-only company for the last 5 years. I have a lot of employees that are all over the world. But now I have to start figuring out about time zones. I need to figure out, hey, this thing is happening. And, I'm like, I really should call, Joni and show him how to do this. But you know what? It's 3 a.m. in Joni's time. So I'm not going to call him. I'll just take care of it. I'll tell him tomorrow. And then I forget to tell him tomorrow because the next fire is happening. And so these things happen. And if you want to work, I'm working right now with a company down here in Puerto Rico. They're building a cybersecurity operations center here in Puerto Rico that's going to be serving a bunch of clients back in the US. They are hiring people from the US and from Puerto Rico, and they're hiring a lot of remote people. The problem is a lot of people they're trying to hire don't have the skill set and the experience to work effectively remote when they first show up. And so you have to think about that too. If you're that person who needs that training, you really want to have somebody who can just pull you up next to them and show them what to do. And a lot of those things, they're not planned meetings. Sometimes it just happens, right? I get an email in, this shows that this incident is happening, and I go, hey, Kip, you're sitting right next to me. Come over here and let me show you what's going on. That kind of thing happens all the time in the real world. And when you're remote, it's an extra step for me to call you up, tell you to get on Zoom, share my screen, and then start trying to work with you when I already wanted to start putting out that fire. And if you're next to me, I can just grab you.
So if you
that
find
kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, so if you find yourself in that situation anyway, where it's your first job, and you're remote anyway, because that's just, you find yourself in that situation. Here's one thing that you can do that will help. I know people who just open up a Zoom or a Teams link with somebody else that they're working on remotely, and they just keep it open for hours, or they'll keep it open for an hour. They'll take a break and they'll come back, and then they'll open it up for another hour. And it's not designed for you to have an hour-long conversation. Rather, it's to simulate what it would be like to sit next to somebody or sit across from somebody and just be able to chat with them, whenever it makes sense. So,
Yeah.
it's not the same, but it might work.